Welcome to the third Nature Calling Conversation podcast from the National Landscape Association. Nature Calling Conversations bring together artists and experts from across disciplines to chat about artistic practice. This conversation is one of a series of 6 and part of a wider programme of work taking place across England until October 2025. For this conversation, Gwyneth Herbert, Jason Singh and Chris Howard, commissioned artists for Mendip Hills National Landscape, spoke about their project, View In, View Out, and working with members of the Weston-super-Mare community and their collaborative artistic process.
All the spaces I have left are leaving pools of light. Let them be light. Let my lesions be lessons. Let us be legions, stand together in the spaces and then filling them with hope, filling them with dreams, or as the ice melts once again, leaving them to just be.
So maybe we just start with you, Gwyneth, given that we've just seen you in action.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much, Karenza. So my name's Gwyn. I am, in my normal day job, a composer, musician, workshop facilitator, performer. And in this piece, I was a co-author, or as a kid in Windwhastle Primary School once said, when I asked the kids, do you know what a composer is? And they said, and I said, there's no wrong answers. I would just take any answer. And one of them said, is a composer when you put a load of leaves into a bucket and just wait for them to turn into something else? And I think that's kind of what my role has been in this process. I've just been gathering leaves and words from so many different places, putting them into a big cauldron, stewing them up with other people's, and also nature, the ultimate director of the entire piece, as we've just seen, and coming out with something quite different than I could have imagined.
I'm Jason Singh. I'm a sound artist. I worked with sound and lots of different listening technologies. I work in spatial audio and also run music workshops and compose and perform.
My name's Chris. My background is in wildlife filmmaking, so I'm primarily a more visual artist. So working just with sound has been a challenge, and we'll get into that as well, I think, a bit later on in the conversation. But yeah, my role really is, well, one, I live on the edge of Mendip, so I'm kind of within the landscape, so knew it quite well. And for Jason and Gwyn, Jason a bit further away, and Gwyn living in Weston, and my role really was to kind of interpret some of that landscape and the wildlife and the nature into this project, and working with these guys to bring the voice of the natural world both to the people that we spoke to and collaborated with, but also to the audience that heard the piece. So we kind of ended up calling me a nature interpreter was my eventual role on the project when we worked it out.
I think for myself, primarily it was a listening project, and putting myself and ourselves in situations and spaces where we could listen and then present those recordings of what we listened to and how we listened back to an audience.
I love that. And for me, definitely a listening project. And because a lot of my work was about meeting the community and meeting the land through the community and the community through interactions with the land. It's how do we listen to ourselves, to our insides and to each other, and that kind of feeding into the word element of it, which weaves all the way through the piece. From
listening to the people in the amazing workshops that Gwyn did, to listening to the natural world, but also listening in very different ways to the landscape in its deep time. We literally put our ears to the rocks and listen to those. We listen to stories of people that have come and gone, and whose legends kind of live on in the Mendips, and through the stories that people tell, the different ways they tell those stories, but also listening to the wildlife and the natural world. And I think again that video is just an amazing example of when the natural world spoke really clearly. It wasn't always there when we listened. I personally tried to record the Dawn Chorus about 7 or 8 times on this project, and most of the times it just failed. For various reasons, it just didn't work, and it wasn't ready to speak to us. But I think on that day where we recorded the Ash to Ashes piece, which is all about the pain of the dying of the ash trees on Mendip. Ash is a hugely important tree in this landscape, but with ash dieback is really struggling, and we're due to lose a huge percentage of our ash trees. So that was what that piece was about. And yeah, as we were recording it, as you've seen and heard, the most incredible storm came through, and the landscape and the natural world spoke alongside Gwyn's beautiful words and Jason's amazing recording. So deep listening, I think, is the key thing here.
There were times when nature wasn't ready to speak to us, and when we first started walking the land together, it felt quite inhospitable. It took us time to meet it and for it to be ready to meet us. But that clip, when we were basically surrounded by this natural amphitheatre that Chris had found of ash trees in various different stages of death and living, and it felt like in that moment like an incredible and unexpected collaboration with nature, and we couldn't have scripted it. And I had to really work on my perfectionism to let the giggle go. I was like, but I giggle. They were like, Gwen, we cannot replay the storm for you. You're just gonna, it's proof you're human. And I'm like, okay, fine. But so that is exactly the way that it ended up in the piece.
It's true that, some of our workshops and meetings with the people, they also were not all that welcoming to begin with. They didn't necessarily trust us from the beginning, which I think is fair. We're people that were coming in and trying to, do this project, which, as we're probably sharing now, is not necessarily all that easy to explain what we were trying to do. But I think that's the most valuable thing is listening in different ways to hear what people are trying to say, as well as the landscape.
I think a part of it was kind of, we'd had a framework in terms of like the things that we wanted and the places that we wanted to explore, along with the experts and people in communities and landscapes and spaces. But we didn't know in terms of the direction of what of where it was going. We didn't want to kind of have that sort of prescriptive idea of the projects, because there were so many elements and sums of it, of the parts. There was lots of different moments where we had to also step into the headspaces as facilitators, as composers, as people meeting people, and people meeting landscape, and politics. So there was a lot of different things, and it was a slow process. The processing of view in, view out will continue for a long time, because we met so many situations that were deeply sensitive, and life-changing and life-affirming. Both as practitioners and also as people meeting people. I live in South Devon, and so I was the furthest away from Mendip, and so there was this kind of thing of like, it's a different place and it's a different landscape. But with my own family's history of displacement from land, meeting people in new places, so many questions, and so many triggers also came up, throughout the project. So I think the processing of it and the kind of what it was will continue for quite a while, for me, anyway.
Just to go and experience, and walking around on one of our first walks around Southward with me and Chris, and the young people, just experiencing that, like feeling the touch of a spider's web for the first time, tasting a slowberry together, finding an eye in a birch tree, that kind of communal discovery led to, and just talking, like listening and talking to people as we walked, that slow build of trust and language and connection and communication. It's why I'm so resistant to the word education and to do with anything that I do, because I feel like it's so much more about experience and encounter. That's the way that I want to work. And some of those encounters are crunchy, and I feel internal resistance too. And all of those crunchy moments are also in the piece. We start with all of the dry stone walls up, and then gradually they crumble, which for me was the journey of the whole piece too, when we were, we went from that place to And it wasn't just young people we worked with people seeking sanctuary, recently arrived in this country too. We worked with an incredible neurospicy theatre group called Open Door, who rang out a wish ritual to the cliff tops of wishes collected from people all over Weston. And this continuous process of handing over and listening within land to ourselves and to each other, and the walls gradually coming down.
This notion of trying to educate the masses is, it's kind of in there, isn't it? I think literally that line is really dangerous. I think we're always learning from each other, which I think is one of the best things I've taken from this, and I know you two, I think, agree as well. We all learn so much from each other and sharing our practices and just keeping talking and helping each other through this through these tough times, through the spikier meetings we've had, through the times when we've been out and the land hasn't spoken to us. Just that collaborative way of working that we've kind of developed has been one of the most special things. We all learn so much from each other and sharing our practices and just keeping talking and helping each other through this through these tough times, through the spikier meetings we've had, through the times when we've been out and the land hasn't spoken to us. Just that collaborative way of working that we've kind of developed has been one of the most special things, I think.
One of the surprising things I found within the work, as well as, obviously the beautiful words, the beautiful stories, but was the music. And I wonder if you could explain a little bit about some of that aspect that we find in the piece, Jason.
Yeah. So kind of what you're referring to there is these biophilic soundscapes that were created from electrical impulses being generated by trees and plants and mushrooms. And I work with a technology that converts electrical signals into music, into notation. And we use this technology to both to listen and to kind of, bring people into the story of what we were trying to create in a very kind of open way, of like, what does a dandelion sound like? Could it create music? Does it speak? We had all these different just questions and things. Nothing was ever set in stone of like, this is a this and this is what this is going to do. It was very much about just looking at ways of having an inroad into kind of creating a dialogue and a discussion with people. So there are soundscapes that are generated by ash tree, the beach, and other sort of textures that were sort of created from the land itself. I worked with lots of different microphone technologies, hydrophones, kind of putting them down into the soil, into water, microphones that were kind of very sensitive to enclosed spaces, binaural microphones for sort of 3D, sort of headphone experiences. And then as I'm an associate artist for D&B Audio Technic, what felt was the right way to move forward was to kind of then present all of these ways that we recorded into an installation that would be this 360 audio piece, using D&B's soundscape technology, which, without getting into the deep technicals of it, is a kind of object-orientated technology which allows you to place sound in various places and spaces, so that listeners can get, the kind of the optimum listening experience no matter where they are in the room. As well, kind of as somebody who works with sound, I'm not really a technician. I kind of hear and experience things that I then work with the technologies that will allow me to recreate those experiences. Some of them are hyper real, some of them are quite, vivid, and, kind of repurpose it and explore, what can be done outside of, say, a musical concert or, a kind of performance scenario. And some of the feedback that we had, just hearing people's comments and, seeing people physically moved by what they were experiencing. And people saying themselves, I've never heard anything like this in my life. I didn't know sound could be so emotional.
I think maybe just to go back to the composting analogy, we had the benefit of a slow brewing process over the course of 9 or 10 months, where the three of us walked the land in different seasons and different emotional states and at different points of the process, and met each other through the land and listened to the land through each other's practices as well. So we had like all of those conversations. And we also had conversations with the members of like the National Landscape team, who are incredibly passionate about the lands that they are custodians and guardians of. So we had those walks. We talked to people who actually work closely with the land itself. A dry stone waller called Tracy, who describes the slow meditative process of building a wall and how much that means to her. And that kind of formed the spine of the words of the piece, really, this idea of walls and what they might mean. Obviously, the voice of nature itself, the lament of the ashed ashes that we just heard there, and the voice of the ancestors that we went down into Goat Church Cavern and just sat in the dark and they're still and listened. And it's like the stones spoke to us. We've had some pretty deep experiences just in silence as part of this project. Then at one point, one of the kids was like, if we hold hands, can we hear our inside music? And I love that moment of like, what if can we listen to each other in a new way? Just so every line in there is sort of loaded with layers and layers of people talking. And I know it sounds weird, but I just got out of the way at the last minute and it fell out. Once that the walls had revealed themselves. And it starts from that first encounter that we had on the open day. We are now entering the national landscape. Now we are exiting the national landscape. These walls that we build for ourselves, both in reality and internally, that keep us separate from ourselves, from each other and the world around us.
I've been hugely grateful for these two, especially for their kind of support on this journey of kind of, learning to trust myself as an artist or believe in myself as an artist. It's been an amazing kind of personal journey as well. When we took the Open Door group out, the Neurospicy Theatre group, that was an amazing experience for me because I was ready to do my spiel and tell them, what I knew about the landscape. And as soon as I started, someone kind of interrupted me, and it became immediately clear, knew way more than I did about the geological history, the social history, and a lot of the the wildlife stuff as well. About ash trees and hawthorn trees and the deep kind of pagan and roots of those species. And so to allow them to take over and them to talk about their experience and what they knew about it, I think was a beautiful kind of moment for me. And again, it's about this conversation between us, people, land, and actually when we showed the piece, they came up to me afterwards and said, thank you for letting me talk. Normally when I start talking, I get shut down, and people want to tell me stuff, they want to educate me, to go back to Gwyn's point. But that was a moment where we needed to be educated and we needed to listen in that kind of deep listening way again.
There was moments where we felt that in the present day. So it wasn't something that was kind of like hearkening back to this time when people were like that, or it felt very much that people were very open to speak about how they felt and what they felt the land did and what the land was doing. And there was moments where we had experiences as we were kind of walking in places, and Chris said something, and then all of a sudden from the distance we'd hear these sounds that we couldn't place. What is that? Was that a voice? Was it a pallet truck? And we'd have these really beautiful, almost supernatural experiences, and sort of hypernatural experience. It was remarkable, and so presenting those things back into the piece in ways that, it wasn't literal of like, oh, now this is a this. There was underscores of sounds that we layered that just sat there, and I feel like, those conversations about the things that are not literal, or the things that aren't quantifiable or are able to sit in statistics, they are hugely important. That is also what makes up this thing of the national landscape. Stuff that is hidden, stuff that is unseen, stuff that is not, you can't speak about it. You can feel it, you can sense it. It's a subtle thing that exists around us. And what was really amazing, truly amazing, was that people weren't afraid to speak about that. Or we weren't, the land wasn't afraid to show us that either. It was deeply spiritual and deeply otherworldly.
A huge thank you to Gwyneth, Jason and Chris. Join us for the next Nature Calling conversation between Matt Rosier, commissioned artist for Chilterns National Landscape, and Matthew Shaw of Stone Club. Visit naturecalling.org.uk to find out more about the programme.